Early Medieval India Part 4. In this section, we will be discussing about a problem of political vacuum which was generated before the arrival of the Turks. And this political vacuum was not only because of the feudalism or political decentralization that we have been discussing, but also because three major powers were contesting with each other for the prized territory of Kannauj. The political history of North India after the age of Harsha was characterized by a tripartite. When I say tripartite, I mean three-party struggle. A three-party struggle of Palas, Pratiharas and the mighty Rashtrakutas in the Deccan region. There was overall a political trend of decentralization in post-Harsha age. So we have covered this. Let us revise. In the post-Harsha age, there was a trend of political decentralization. And this was because of multifarious factors which we have already covered. But between 750 and 1000 AD, emerged three powers, the Palas of eastern India, covering region of Bengal, parts of Bihar, Orissa, and also later extending in Assam or the Kamrup region. The Pratiharas in West India and parts of northwestern Uttar Pradesh. So they extended over parts of Rajasthan, Gujarat, Malwa region and the upper Gangetic plain. And the Rashtrakutas in Deccan. The history of Deccan, which we will see later, which we have already discussed in ancient India with respect to the Chalukyas of Badami, the Kadambas, all of them. So the history of Deccan has been a history of political powers aspiring to have a foothold in north and also in south. So the political history of Rashtrakutas was also the history of struggle or contest with these and along with the political powers of South India. These three major powers, Rashtrakutas, the Palas and Pratiharas, all of them were fighting for Kannauj. So this tripartite struggle, although they also contested, they fought with each other on certain overlapping territorial interests, but the common interest of each of them was Kannauj. But overall, this tripartite struggle over 2 centuries proved to be inconclusive. And more than this, more than engaging, more than diverting the vast army resources of these three important kingdoms, it created a situation of political vacuum in North India, which was exploited by the Turks, which provided for Turkish invasion. So when we would be discussing what were the factors responsible for Turkish invasion, it was not only the Central Asian politics or the resources of North India with its fertile Gangetic plains, the minerals and also the rich temples, but also the political vacuum. All these powers, they lacked the strategic foresight because of which they neglected the defense, especially in terms of Pratihara. The Pratihara dynasty, the Pratiharas of Gujarat Malwa region neglected the defense of northwest, and later Mahmud Ghazni was able to crush and defeat the Pratiharas. Now the question is, why Kannauj? Why were they contesting when they had resources? It is not that they were not ruling over important resources or important cities, but why Kannauj? So we see that all of them, their interests, if we talk about Pratiharas versus Palas, so they had bilateral conflict also. So Palas versus Pratihara, if we see, they fought for control or the Pratiharas were trying to expand from northwestern Uttar Pradesh of the present times to the Banaras, that is eastern Uttar Pradesh. So they were fighting for eastern Gangetic plains. And when the Palas were defeated by a number of Pratihara kings, they started looking eastwards. So the Palas, when they were defeated, they started expanding in this direction. So we see that the Pratiharas are extending in the eastern India. They are pushing the Palas further eastwards. Also in terms of the conflict between the Rashtrakutas and the Pratiharas. If we talk about this, in the forthcoming slides, we will see the political ambitions of the Rashtrakuta rulers. The Rashtrakutas ruled over a vast region in Deccan and also had a significant foothold, as you see, in South India also. In fact, there was a point when one of the rulers, Krishna III, he was able to extend as far south as Rameshwaram by defeating the Chola king Prantaka first. So the Rashtrakutas were also trying to increase their foothold over North India, and because of this, to control the Gujarat Malwa region. The Gujarat Malwa region, the Gujarat region for its fertile plains responsible for cultivation of cotton, its seaports, and Malwa region for the non-ferrous metals. And also Malwa holds a strategic value in the political history of India. And we'll be reiterating this point, the strategic significance of Malwa again and again. So they were fighting for Gujarat and Malwa. The Pratiharas were already the masters. They were the overlord of this region and they were trying to defend this region from the Rashtrakutas. Now the question of Kannauj. Why were they fighting for Kannauj? If we talk about Kannauj, Kannauj was the capital of Harshvardhan, and Harshvardhan was the last of the great king of the north. He was, as mentioned in Ban Bhatt's Harshcharita, he was Shakalo Uttarapathnath, that is the lord of the north. So Kannauj as the capital of Harsha, who was known as Shakalo Uttarapathnath, that is the lord of the northern trade route. He, with the help of a system of alliances we have already covered, he was able to weave together a very powerful confederate polity. So whoever captured or whoever had control over Kannauj could claim the overlordship of Kannauj. So because of this, there was a lot of prestige and historical value attached with Kannauj. Kannauj was also located en route the Uttarapath. So by controlling Kannauj, it was possible to regulate the northern trade, land trade along Gangetic Basin. Besides, Kannauj was a fertile basin. So because of these factors, because of prestige, because of resourcefulness, and also the important location of Kannauj, everybody saw this as a prized possession and they contested with each other. So let us see each of these powers and how they not only contributed to the politics of North India, but more so their contribution is notable in the field of art and culture. To begin with, the Palas of East India. The Pala kingdom, as it is attested by a number of inscriptions and some of the later Buddhist texts, was found by a person, a commoner known as Gopala. The political trend of early medieval India was a trend of rise of unknown ruling houses based on their ability to mobilize land revenue, to mobilize a large standing force. So it is believed that Gopala's father, he was a mere soldier who later became a general and was able to capture territory in the Magad region. Palas were ruling over Bengal. If we look at the political history of Bengal without getting into the name of the dynasties, Bengal has always aspired for political autonomy, especially during the medieval times and before. So, when earlier Magad was the seat of power in India, Bengal was very close to the power center, that is Patliputra. But later, when the power center or the hub shifted to Delhi, then the rulers, the regional governors of Bengal, they always aspired for autonomy, because between Bengal and Delhi was the riverine basin, the riverine plain of Uttar Pradesh, the Gangetic plains punctuated by a number of rivers, because of which during those times communication was difficult. And hence, with declining polity in the center at Delhi, the Bengal rulers could rule. So after Harshvardhan, who was ruling from Kannauj, there was no major power who were able to control the Palas. Hence, a soldier who became a general was able to capture territory in Magad and mobilize a standing force. However, the greatest king who was also recognized not only for his political pursuits but for his cultural patronage was Dharmapala. In the Buddhist texts, in the travelogues of a number of Arab travelers, there is a reference of a king known as Dharmapala. Dharmapala, though, was defeated by a Rashtrakuta king, Dhruva. He was defeated by Dhruva, but when Dhruva was engaged in South India, because the Rashtrakutas were fighting on multiple fronts. They were fighting in North India, they were fighting in East India, they were fighting alongside their neighbors in the eastern coastal belt and also in South India. So when Dhruva, after defeating Dharmapala, turned his attention towards South India, Dharmapala recaptured the lost territory. In fact, if we go by Buddhist texts, he was also able to capture Kannauj. The other ruler was Devpala. Devpala was defeated, he was pushed by the Pratiharas. And because he was pushed by the Pratiharas, because the Pratiharas were trying to expand into East India, he began to expand towards east. So we find that from the time of Devpala, there was a eastward extension of territory of the Palas. So he ruled over Bihar, Assam and parts of Odisha. Later, he even extended to Assam, the then Kamrup kingdom. The account of Pala administration, we will be discussing in detail the Pala administration, was given by an Arab merchant, Suleiman. Suleiman refers to the Pala kingdom as Ruhma, and he mentions about a very prominent king, Dharma, who was most probably Dharmapala. So he also refers to a king known as Dharma. He also says that the Palas were in conflict with the Pratiharas and Rashtrakutas and they maintained a vast army. The numbers sometimes appear to be exaggerated, but one thing that we know for sure about the Palas is that the Pala army had a distinct elephant wing. From the time of the Magad dynasty establishment, with the clearing of forest, not only there was availability of timber as a building material, but also the elephant in these forests were later, they were tamed and not only were used as animals for carrying heavy load, but also an important wing of the army. And this is what has also been referred to. Later we find that many of the Rajput rulers also were fond of elephant. However, use of elephant in army, it later proved to be a major limitation of the Indian rulers when they faced the easily flexible cavalry of the Turks. If we refer to the Palas, the Pala rule was the last rule or the kingdom to patronize Buddhism. So after the Palas, Buddhism was on a decline. And in the Tibetan texts, there is a reference of Palas as patrons of Vajrayana or Tantrayana Buddhism, that is Tantric Buddhism. They not only constructed stupas, monasteries, but they also built a very important center of Buddhist learning, that is Vikramshila University and revived a global university which was built by Kumaragupta first during the Gupta times, that is the Nalanda University. Let us understand something about Nalanda University, which was a global university attracting students and teachers from all over the world, mainly from those regions where Buddhism had a firm hold. Nalanda University was established by Kumaragupta first, who is also referred as Shakraditya. It was a global university and it was maintained through village grant. Approximately 200 villages, along with service class artisans, carpenters, potters, were attached specifically for the maintenance of the Nalanda University. Nalanda University, it provided for the learning of all types of subjects. Religious subjects, Buddhism, Vedic texts, science, astronomy, astrology, philosophy, mathematics, all these important subjects. A number of prominent luminaries were important philosophers, renowned travelers were associated with Nalanda University. So its alumni was very illustrious. Aryabhat, Nagarjuna, even Huensang visited and studied here. Huensang also refers that Harsha provided patronage to the Nalanda University. Itzing, the Chinese traveler, also visited this Nalanda University. So it was a very prominent university, a global university which attracted students from all over the world, mainly from East Asia. And it had as many as 8 gateways, and in these 8 gateways there were Dwarpals or janitor who used to take a very rigorous test. And the percentage of student clearing these entrance test was very low. So there was an entrance test to get into Nalanda University. Nalanda University was also known for its vast libraries. Ratnanidhi, Ratnaranjak and Ratnasagar were the prominent libraries associated. So when Dharmapala was ruling, the Nalanda University was on a decline. He revived it with village grant, but unfortunately later it was destroyed by Muhammad bin Bakhtiyar Khilji. Dharmapala also established another university, that is Vikramshila University at Bhagalpur district. So he established the Vikramshila University in the Bhagalpur district of Bihar, and he established this alongside reviving because he felt that Nalanda may not be able to generate so much of scholarship and also of scholarly research. So he revived at a time when Nalanda University or its scholarly standards were falling. Vikramshila University was a very prominent center for Tantric Buddhism. It is believed that many of the manuscripts, texts, miniature paintings, they were carried by the scholars and the students to different parts of the world. So miniature paintings, texts, all of them were carried to Tibet. So in Tibet today, Tibet Ladakh region, if you visit, you will find that the brand of or the type of Buddhism which is practiced is Vajrayana, that is Tantric Buddhism. A notable scholar was Atisha Dipankara, who studied here, and he carried the texts to Tibet. Another scholar was Santhara Rakshita. This university was also, unfortunately, it was destroyed by Muhammad bin Bakhtiyar Khilji. So today all that we have are the ruins of some of the monasteries, some of the stupas which was constructed by Dharmapala and which also was an important center of learning. So both of them were destroyed by Muhammad bin Bakhtiyar Khilji. With the decline, with the destruction of these two centers of learning and the absence of patronage, because the Rajputs and whoever Hindu rulers were there in the later times, they patronized Brahmanism or Hinduism. So this was the last phase in which Buddhism or Buddhist culture, Buddhist architecture flourished. Never again was any revival in the fate of Buddhism scene. If we talk more about the culture of Palas, the Palas had cultural links with Tibet, we have seen already, because of the visit of a number of students. In fact, it is said that when the Turks attacked or the Turkish invasion, many of the students fled to Nepal. From there, in small groups, they went to Tibet. So there was cultural links on the grounds of exchange of Buddhist texts, Buddhist learning between Tibet and India. In Southeast Asia, also, especially the Shailendra dynasty, also a follower of Buddhism, they exchanged ambassadors, they exchanged gifts also. So there was a very good relation. In fact, with the Abbasids also, Abbasid Caliphate in the Arab land, we find that a number of Indians went, Indian merchants, Indian scholars went. We have found some Arab coins from Pala kingdom. And these Indians later introduced mathematics, Indian philosophy in the Arab land. In the field of architecture, this was a specific phase of Buddhist architecture. Buddhist architecture, where we find a number of stupas were created. The stupas in cruciform plan. Plan is how the different architectural components are arranged on the ground, or we can say the ground plan. So a cruciform plan looks like this. We have most of the Nagara temples in a cruciform plan. So this is a cruciform plan. And here in these stupas there are grooves. Grooves in which images of the deities and also images from the Jatka tales have been found. Most of these stupas are located in Bangladesh. One stupa is also in Antichak in eastern Bihar. The Palas were also known for their miniature painting. In fact, the miniature painting tradition, it began during the Palas. It was miniature painting with prominent Buddhist theme or the Vajrayana theme, and the paintings were in pothi format. We often hear our parents saying that children of present day, they carry pothi, means heavy textbooks. So a pothi format looked like this, in which every page, which was either made of a palm leaf or a vellum paper. So mostly it was palm leaf, sometimes a thin paper known as vellum paper was used, and here a hole was pierced, and we have a central image like you can see here, and everything was written. So painting along with writing, and mostly there was a single image with a light background to emphasize on the images. And these images in miniature painting had a side profile with bulging eyes. We'll be discussing more about the miniature painting and its features in our art and culture section. So all these pages were tied together and covered in a wooden cover. So they were put in a wooden cover. So because of which they could be preserved and carried from one place to other. So if we talk about the Buddhist themes, it is inspired from the Ajanta murals and also the bronze and stone Nataraja idol. And it appears many times that these paintings would come to life. It appears that it would come to life. So they are very realistic paintings, and these paintings are a very important source of development of Vajrayana Buddhism, and it spread from India to Tibet and Southeast Asia. So these paintings also provided for what we call as cultural diplomacy or Buddhist diplomacy. The Pala administration was a blend of centralizing tendency or features of the Guptas and also the overall feudal trend that was flowing in the early medieval times. So we find the Pala administration both elements of political centralization in terms of trend or in terms of traits of monarchy from the Guptas. There has been a general trend among the regional rulers to emulate the prestige, power, honor of the ancient kings and the ruling dynasties. So we find this political centralization, this monarchical trait in terms of the lofty titles which was assumed by these Pala kings. Lofty titles such as Parameshwar, Param Bhattaraka, Maharaja Dhiraj. In earlier times, these were the titles which was held by the emperor's powerful monarch who used to rule over vast territory and had a number of regional governors. However, now it was more of historical nostalgia or an tendency to maintain or to claim as much as possible the power of the ancient times. However, the overall trend of polity was political decentralization, and this was because of the institution of land grants. So we have, because of land grants, there were a number of feudal lords. Feudal lords who were delegated along with the land grants military and judicial powers. Before moving to these landlords who also assumed some titles, Mahasamanta, Rana, Ranak. Today in parts of Bengal, Samanta is a famous title. If we talk about, before moving to these feudal lords, let us also discuss the various administrative divisions. The various important administrative divisions, and this administrative division was roughly along the lines of the Guptas. The empire was divided into provinces, and the provinces were known as Bhukti, and the Bhukti was under a governor known as Uparika. Below him or below the province was an intermediate or an intermediary territorial setup between a district and a state. This was Vishaya under a Vishayapati. The district was known as Mandala, and then we had a number of smaller units boiling down to the village as the lowest unit of administration. Land grants were given for military service and also for judicial service. These beneficiaries, these donis, assumed titles Rana, Ranak, Maha Samanta. Rana, Ranak, Maha Samanta. However, we also have evidence of land grants to Brahmanas to earn religious merit. Though the Palas were patrons, they were themselves believer of Buddhism, Vajrayan Buddhism, but they could not afford to ignore the rising influence of Vedic Brahmanism and the influence of Brahmanas as custodian priests of the temples. So we find that some temples were also constructed during the Pala kingdom, which we will see separately during our art and culture architecture portion. So they gave to Brahmanas, to temples, land grants, along with the Buddhist monasteries, the educational institutions, mainly to earn religious merit. We also find that some of the peasants, the rich peasants, were also given land grant to extend cultivation. These type of peasants referred to are known as Kaivartas. Later, some of these Kaivartas, they protested against the exploitation of the Mahasamantas, the Samantas, and we hear of a peasant revolt, that is the Kaivarta revolt in parts of eastern Bengal, which also speaks about the considerable influence enjoyed by these peasants in the local politics of eastern Bengal during the Palas. There was no evidence though of sub-infeudation. So we can roughly say that the size of a land being granted was not that high, because of which the beneficiaries were themselves involved in cultivation with the help of agricultural labor. So when there is no evidence of sub-infeudation or further delegation of responsibilities and power, we can say the average size of land grant was low. Otherwise, in the case of a large size of land grant, definitely it would not be practically possible for any beneficiary to personally engage or to take care of the entire cultivable area. Though the bureaucracy of the Palas was nowhere comparable to that of the Mauryas and the Guptas, yet we find reference of a number of important officials. We have Raja Mahasamanta, they were the feudal lords. We have Mahasandhi Vigrahaka. So if you break this term, Sandhi means peace, Vigrah means war. So he was a minister of war and peace. He was the foreign minister, responsible for declaring war and also for broking peace, for diplomacy. Then we have Stasta Dhikarta. He was responsible for tax collection. Agriculture also prospered, because of which we have reference of a number of agricultural officials. Gavadhyaksh. We have a number of Chagadhyaksh. So we have two very important officials, Gavadhyaksh and Chagadhyaksh, who were associated with agricultural operations. They were associated with agricultural operations. Alongside the Palas in West India and also having a foothold over the western Gangetic plains were the Pratihara. They are also known as Gurjar Pratihara. Gurjar is a term used for tribes. And it is no surprise, because early medieval India was also a time when a number of tribes, especially the tribal chiefs, were able to mobilize resources, accumulate a standing army and proclaim themselves in the event of political vacuum as ruling houses. So we see a trend of politicization of tribes, upward social mobility, integration of tribes not only in the mainstream society but also in mainstream politics. This has been referred to by a number of historians as Rajputization or Kshatriyization of tribes. These Gurjars were tribes and later they became ruling powers by a phenomena known as Rajputization, because now instead of a Kshatriya is a traditional ruling class as mentioned in the Varna, every ruler proclaimed himself as a Rajput or a Rajputra. Rajputra means somebody who is from a royal family. So this was Rajputization or Kshatriyization of tribes. They were known as Pratihara. Pratihara is a word which literally means a defender or a gatekeeper. They proclaimed, because one of the ways in which these tribes or the upstarts or those who were not from royal family, from humble background, they legitimized their rule was on the basis of mythology and genealogy. So they legitimized their rule by concocting, by presenting a myth, a story of descendancy from a great hero or somebody from a lunar or a solar dynasty. So these Pratiharas, they presented the idea of genealogy, that is ascendancy, lineage from the great Lakshman of Ramayana. Lakshmana was the janitor, he was the doorkeeper, he was the guard of Rama for 14 years in exile. Because of which, in the stories related to, in the bardic stories of Pratihara, it is mentioned that these Pratiharas proclaimed their lineage from Lakshmana. The Pratiharas contested with the Palas for the control of eastern Uttar Pradesh and with the Rashtrakutas for the control of Gujarat Malwa region. They ruled over Rajasthan, Malwa and Upper Gangetic Plain. And the greatest ruler was Mihir Bhoj, who, according to accounts, he controlled and ruled over Kannauj for about 100 years, which definitely to an extent was an exaggeration. He was a devotee of the boar incarnation of Lord Vishnu, Adibraha. He was a Vishnu devotee. The Arab travelers, mainly Al-Mashudi. Al-Mashudi was a geographer, he was a traveler and a historian. They talk a lot about the Pratiharas. The Pratiharas were known for their excellent cavalry, which they imported from Central Asia and Arabia. So unlike the Palas, whose military strength was based on the slow-moving, gigantic elephants, they believed in mobility, in inflexibility. So they imported a lot of horses from Central Asia. One of the great king was Mahendrapala. Mahendrapala, who fought with the king of Kashmir to expand, but in this battle lost Punjab. Later, he was successful over Magad and North Bengal. That means that there was a time when they were able to extend as far east as Magad. According to Al-Mashudi's account, he says that the kingdom was known as Al-Juzzar, probably referring to, or it was a tongue twist of Gurzar, referring to the Gurjar Pratiharas, and they referred to a vast army of the Pratiharas and the battle with the local king of Multan. The Pratiharas were also patrons of art and culture. From this portion, we generally expect a question to be asked from art and culture. In 2020, a question has been asked with respect to the Pala contribution to the Buddhist art in early medieval times. So even in optional, you expect a question from the contribution of the Pratiharas, Palas and Rashtrakutas in art and culture. So they patronized various forms of art, literature, and there was a great poet, a Sanskrit poet, Rajshekhar. It is believed that Rajshekhar, the great Sanskrit poet who also wrote in Prakrit, has to his credit a number of prominent literary works. He claims himself to be the guardian teacher of Mahendrapala. So he claims himself to be the teacher of Mahendrapala, and he was patronized by the grandson of Mihir Bhoj, Mahipala. So he was the court poet of Mahipala, who was the grandson of Mihir Bhoj. He has written a number of important works such as Kavya Mimamsa. In his Kavya Mimamsa, he has written or he has laid down rules for a good poetry. This was intended to help the aspiring poets to write or to develop this skill of poem writing. His another notable work was Karpur Manjari. About Karpur Manjari, it is believed that his wife, whom he was very fond of, Avanti Sundari, who was also a notable literary figure. In fact, Rajshekhar is the only poet or the literary figure who has given due credit for her literary contributions to his wife Avanti Sundari. So Karpur Manjari was a play which he had written to please his wife Avanti Sundari. Another prominent literary work was Bal Ramayan. The Pratiharas also maintained good cultural relations with the Arabic world. They were also builders of great temples, the great temples with open pavilion style. And this open pavilion means the Pradakshina Path was open, and this temple or the temple architecture later inspired the Maru Gurjar style of the Solankis. The Solanki of Gujarat, who patronized Jainism, they were known for the Maru Gurjar style of temple architecture, largely inspired from the Pratiharas. Two of the notable examples of temple architecture are the Baroli temple complex and the Mahavir Jain temple in Jodhpur.